Welcome to Career and Leadership Real Talk, the no-nonsense guide for ambitious managers who want to have more impact and progress their career. I'm Pamela Langan, a job search coach and expert CV writer specialising in helping frustrated professionals land the jobs and pay rises they know they deserve.
And I'm Jackie Jagger, a leadership and mindset coach specialising in helping newly promoted and new to role leaders to avoid the dickhead trap and lead with confidence. Between us, we've helped hundreds of leaders and managers to find new roles, take ownership of their careers, and handle the challenges that job searches and leadership responsibility inevitably bring. And now we're joining forces to share with you what we know has worked for our clients. Hello and welcome to this week's episode. We are really looking forward to this one. It is a follow-up to one of our most popular episodes ever, which was How Not to Have Shit Meetings. If you haven't listened to that, then that is definitely one that is worth listening to. And today we're going to be building on that because we know that in a hybrid working era, post-COVID, that an awful lot more meetings are happening online. And lots of leaders and managers out there have had little to no training on running meetings online. So we are joined today by Steph Vidal-Hall, who is going to be sharing with us some brilliant expertise around having better meetings online. So Steph, a huge welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
So Steph and I first met at a coaches event, a CPD event, and literally I made a beeline for you, Steph, immediately after, because I knew that you would be a great guest and have masses of value to share with our listeners. So can I ask you, first of all, to just introduce yourself and share a little bit about what you do and why meetings are such a topic of passion for you?
Ooh, fantastic. I am Steph Vidal-Hall and I am making meetings matter. I run meetings for people, big important meetings where they want to take part in it. So I will run and facilitate them. I train people to have better meetings where every voice will be heard. And I also do quite a bit of team coaching, which I call work together well. So wherever a team has a new project or a tricky dynamic, something that they need to sort out for themselves, I'll make sure that they've got a really good space and they cut to the chase and that they can talk about difficult things, but do that together in a really safe and productive way. So that's me, really. Why am I passionate, you asked me? Really weird. It sounds left field, Jackie, but I went to a deeply horrible girls' boarding school and I'd been told that this was a wonderful opportunity and I would be able to learn and it would be amazing. And actually, that's not what it was like at all, partly because I was unhappy there. But that gave me a lifetime obsession with how do you create an environment? How do you create a space where people feel so comfortable they can be the best version of themselves? They can collaborate together, they can think together, they can learn together, they can enjoy being there. So we spend an awful lot of time in our meetings, and I just got a real nerdy to say it, but a real joy in making that working day better and making something that is fundamental and happens all the time the best it could possibly be. So yes, I live to be in meetings, which is a very strange thing, but there you go.
Yeah, I'm sure that will sound odd to people because so many of my clients' meetings are their nemesis, and the number of meetings they're in, the way that they're run, and trying to run meetings better for themselves, for the meetings that they're having to run, is often a topic of conversation that comes up. So before we get into how to run meetings online, let's start with what meetings should and shouldn't be online, because I think this is a really interesting topic because since COVID, there seems to have been a real expectation that kind of any meeting can be online. I'd love to know your thoughts on, can any meeting be online, or are there some meetings that really should be in person?
I would say that if you have a complex topic, if you have a topic that might be full of conflict, if you've got a wide range of status in the room, if you've got very junior people, very senior people, anything that has that complexity and difficulty, I think that is going to be better off face to face. And also, what's the maturity of the relationships in the room? If people don't know each other very well at all, and you've got the complexity and the difficulty, then again, that's better face to face. There's nothing like face for building those relationships. So if it's making you feel nervous, that might be a face-to-face meeting. If it's, oh, we all love each other, we've got a really swift, beautiful agenda today, and we know how we collaborate, and we've got a clear process for that, you can probably do that online. I'd go the other way as well and say there are times when you do want to be online. Accessibility, you've got a dispersed team, you want to put something in place where people do have that regular touch point, then yes, online can be absolutely great, and it can, when used well, really equalise the space, which is something that I'm very keen on and very happy to talk about further.
You know, it's really interesting listening to that, like, real clear distinction between what should be online and what should be face to face, because I think sometimes it's easy to get caught up in it, isn't it, and think, well, do we need to save time? Like, and going back to the episode that we did previously, just like making sure you've got that purpose for the meeting and you know exactly why that meeting needs to happen. And I think sometimes, because meetings are part of the day-to-day, we just get caught up in them, don't we? So it can feel sometimes, like you say, if you're feeling nervous, maybe that's the time to go, okay, what is making me feel nervous? And like you say, who's going to be in the room? And then based on that, like, what way are we going to play this? And I think that's a really nice way to think about it. And I suppose from an online meeting perspective, because we've all been thrown into this online world of meetings, haven't we? And we've got to do them, got to make them work, got to make them effective, but nobody really gets any training on them, which is why I think it's great that you really focus on this. So I suppose my next question would be for you, like, what are your responsibilities as an online meeting host? Like, what do you need to do to make sure that meeting is effective and that everybody gets what they need and can input effectively within that space?
Yeah, you're so right, Pamela. 85% of managers don't have training on any type of meeting, full stop, let alone the online meetings. But moving on to your, what are the responsibilities? I'm going to talk about the general responsibilities I think are there for any meeting host, first of all. And I do love that word hosting, because when you think of yourself as a meeting host, that takes any feeling of bossiness or trying to push things forward. But let's talk about the responsibilities. This is from a brilliant book by a woman called Priya Parker called The Art of Gathering. And I love it because it's just so clear. Your responsibility as the meeting host is to protect the purpose of the meeting. It's to connect everybody there, and it's to equalise the space. It's to create a space where, however junior you are, if you've got the gem that needs putting forward in that meeting, you will be able to do it, because you as host have made sure that you've equalised the space. So those are your clear responsibilities straight away. And for me, that's for any meeting. And I'm really happy to talk about, I'd love to talk about all of those separate ones. But I think also there's another thing that's particularly there with online, and that is that you yourself are at ease with your online setting. So it may mean that your role as the host is that you are able to act gracefully and be completely at ease, because actually, if you're working on Teams or if you're working on Zoom, that you know what you're doing. You know how to set up a breakout room, which is absolutely key in an online meeting, by the way. How to set up a breakout room, how to use the react buttons, where your chat box is, and how you're going to be minuting that meeting, either by using AI or that you're creating some quick and dirty minutes with the chat box or whatever you like to do. So for me, and going back to that, we said, are there any meetings that shouldn't be online? And I said, oh, if you're feeling nervous, then think again. You, as a meeting host, I think it's your job to do enough preparation that actually you feel completely at ease in that space, because you know what you're doing. And that applies to the tech as well.
I love that description, and when you recommended it, I started listening to the audiobook of The Art of Gathering, and one of the things that I have really loved about that book is the idea of the purpose serving as a kind of, I think she describes it as a bouncer. So almost it helps you to define, being really clear on what is the reason, helps you to know who should be invited, but also who shouldn't be invited. And absolutely. I think so much of meeting culture, particularly with online meetings, it's so easy for meeting invites to just fill people's diaries. And one of the things, again, that I work with clients on is understanding from their own perspective as a leader, what shouldn't they be attending? And often there's a politeness where people invite everyone that possibly could be.
Yeah.
where a host hasn't always thought about that depth of who should be and who shouldn't be. So beyond that, then, having really got that clarity around why am I holding this meeting, what is it that I'm bringing people together for, and having that awareness around the tools. Pam and I share a hatred of Teams and would fight to use Zoom every day.
Yes.
But having that kind of confidence with the online tools and having done some of that basic work, what comes next then when people are preparing for online meetings?
It's back to what you need to do for every meeting, Jackie. And I know from listening to your excellent podcast that you've echoed some of this previously, but for me, it's about what is a minimum viable meeting. And I am such a meetings geek that I follow loads of other superb facilitators. And this idea is from Dr. Carrie Goucher. And if you're out there and you want somebody to follow on LinkedIn, oh my goodness, she's amazing and so incredibly generous with her tips on how to run amazing meetings. But Carrie talks about minimum viable meeting because she's come from a tech background. It's like that minimum viable product prototyping thing. But what is the purpose? We've spoken about that already. And then again, we've touched on it. What is the contribution I need from each person to get to my purpose? And then in its simplest form, it's to say, okay, and what important questions will we answer together? What are the questions that will get us to our purpose, will allow us to achieve the outcomes we need to achieve to get to our purpose? And that, for me, that needs to be done for every meeting. And it could be a 5-minute conversation in the corridor with a peer, or it could be, actually, this is a super complex meeting with some difficult characters in the room, and actually I need to spend an hour preparing this. It just depends, and it depends how skilled you're getting with that. But for me, that's what you need to do before every meeting. What's the purpose? So what contribution do I need from each person, and who needs to be there to achieve that purpose? And then what important questions will we answer together?
Wow, I absolutely love that, because that's great from a preparation perspective, but also like a time saving perspective, because if you can do that level of preparation before the meeting and you know what you're expecting from people, you can have them conversations before. Yeah, it might take a little bit longer than just throwing a meeting into the calendar and hoping for the best. But in the long run, you're going to get so much more out of that. And you're going to be able to really demonstrate your impact there as well, aren't you, as a leader, especially, or as a meeting host? Like, you're going to be able to show the impact that you've made in a shorter amount of time just by setting yourself up that way.
Absolutely. And I sometimes think that's the most important value that I bring to my clients, Pamela, is actually the ability to say, what is it you want to achieve? Let me help you find the questions that will get you there. And within that, there is another piece of work within saying, okay, what are the important questions we'll answer together, is an exercise that I use with everybody. I do some one-to-one coaching as well, particularly of leaders who are wanting to improve their meetings. But this exercise is absolutely fundamental. It's once you've got your overarching purpose, we want to talk together as a team. We want to make sure that our online meetings are as good as they can be. So that's your overarching purpose. And then within that, I'd be saying, what are the issues within this purpose? What do we need to think about together to do this? What outcomes do we want from thinking about that together? And then the last bit, which is what questions, if we could answer them together, would get us to those outcomes that we've just said that we want. So, for instance, with that overarching purpose, as a team, we need to have better online meetings because actually we're a digital first company, let's say. Issues that I've heard before might be we don't know where everybody is. We don't know what suits everybody best. And also we're going through constant change. Everything's changing all the time and we can't keep up. So those are your issues. And then I might say, what outcomes do you want on that? And people might say, we need to know where everybody is during their day. When can they meet? And also we need to know what suits them best. So those are the outcomes we need in terms of knowledge. And also everything's changing all the time. It's so fast paced now. Actually, we need to learn from each other. We're losing a lot of learning. So those are the outcomes they're working towards. And I would do this for a client, or I would prepare this if I was running a meeting as a leader. I would do this for myself. But I've also done this, if you're confident, once you've got used to doing it with some friends. I'll also do this with a team so they really own these questions, and the time taken thrashing this out solves a huge amount of things. But then moving on with the examples I've given you, some of the questions that people have come up with have been super basic. What does your day look like? When do you like to have your meetings? When do you like to do your focused work? How can we best capture our learning? How often do we need to reflect together? What are the agreements we can make around running the best possible digital meetings? So when you've got a question as a focus, you can go into a meeting, somebody can say, this meeting is about working together better. My mind just turns into jelly, and I'm probably off on one thinking about either what's outside the window or the worst team I was ever in, because that's just where my mind goes. Whereas if you say to me, Steph, what do you need to be at your best in an online meeting? Oh my goodness, I've got all sorts of things to say. So yeah, and then we've got real engagement and we're cutting to the chase. So yeah, I hope I've answered your question there, Pamela. Does that answer that one?
Yeah, it really does. And there's just one other thing that I wanted to ask you about as well, that I wrote down while you were talking earlier around equalising the space within those meetings. And I just wondered if you could expand a little bit on that for the listeners, because that for me just sounded like that is an ideal opportunity, regardless of what level you're at, to be able to make an impact and contribute within meetings. So what is that, and how can people do that to make sure, or how can the host do that to make sure that everybody is getting or being able to contribute within that meeting?
I'm so glad you've asked me to expand that, because equalising space is a bit jargony, isn't it? It's a bit like, oh, what's that then? I remember when I first doing some market research with clients and asking them why they asked me to come in and help them, and all of them would say, you make sure that every voice is heard. You make sure that the big characters, and we all know what that means, don't dominate the room. So that for me is what equalising the space is about. It's making sure not only that everybody gets a chance to speak, it's that everybody feels comfortable to be themselves, because you can't think as yourself until you feel free to be yourself. So if you look different from people in the room, if you're more junior than people in the room, if there's a massive status gap, getting your voice in the room early on demonstrates that you as the leader actually really do want their thinking. You're not just saying, I want your thinking. So for me, the top tip, Pamela, getting back to what you actually asked me, the top tip is that you start every meeting by just asking everyone to answer a really simple, straightforward question that everyone there can answer and can feel good about answering. They get to present their best selves. I am a creature of habit. I love structure, and I nearly always kick off with a classic question, which is, what's currently going well in your work and or life? And I make it clear to everybody as well that not everyone has to answer that if they don't want to. And I'll talk a little bit more about a technique for doing that. But I would always kick off by making sure that everybody has a chance, that I'm asking people to speak. And they know that this is a space where everybody speaks, because I actually value their thinking. And I've asked them to meeting because I want their thinking on the purpose that we're about to achieve.
Yeah, that's just perfect. And I think for our listeners, that will probably be really useful, like how they can implement that within their meetings and how they can make sure that every voice is heard. And we're massive Brené Brown fans on this podcast. And one of the things that she says is that if you can't be yourself, you'll never feel like you belong. So that it all links in, doesn't it, to the culture and everything. Yes. And you think something as simple as a meeting, it's just a meeting, we get together, we discuss things, we make decisions, but there's so much more to it, isn't there?
Absolutely. And I totally agree with Brené Brown, but I would also amplify that. I'm trained in a technique which is called the thinking environment. And the thinking environment is based on the idea that the quality of everything you do is based on the quality of the thinking that you do first, but also that your ability to think is really profoundly impacted by the way you're being treated at that time. So all of my work is based on the kinds of ways of treating each other that enable everyone in the room to do their own best thinking. And I think the best way of explaining this is, like, there are people that you sit down with them and you go, oh, can I run this past you? And they don't say anything else. They're just with you. And you go, oh my God, you've helped me so much. That was fantastic. I've sorted it. And then there are other people, you get into the room, you say one thing to them, and then you've dropped your keys and your sandwich landed upside down because they make you so nervous. And so I would add to the Brené Brown that it's, until you can be yourself, you can't think for yourself. I don't have a formal diagnosis, but I would identify as somebody who's neurodivergent, who has ADHD. And if I'm trying to conceal the fact that I want to comment on your lipstick and I've noticed the butterfly out of the window, if I'm trying to conceal that, it's quite hard for me to be my best self. I can also be incredibly focused and driven, but it's just being able to express myself, knowing that I'm welcome, being invited to speak. If I can be myself, I can think as myself. And actually going back to that, planning the meeting, we've got the purpose, we've got the contribution from each person. You've asked people to the meeting because you need their contribution. And if you don't need it, you shouldn't have asked them, as I'm sure you've covered. I know you've covered before. So yeah, it's really important that we're welcoming the whole person so they can do their own best thinking.
Wow, that's powerful, isn't it?
I love that so much. And it's making me smile listening to it, because regular listeners will know that Pam and I have joked in the past about both of us to get straight into things in a meeting. We're both quite pacey people. And back in the day, Pam and I were both being told, you need to do more of the rapport building, you need to do, and that often translates in online meetings to chatting about the weather or about something that was on TV. But that actually then is only being inclusive for people that happen to have that thing in common. Yes. And I think for both of us, that's felt quite weird that you would try and do this fake rapport building that doesn't really work. Whereas what you've described is a very purposeful way to open the meeting with that contribution from each person. And I love that question. Are there any other questions that people could use besides what's going well for you at the moment? What other types of questions could they use as openers?
I'm very keen to equalise that space. So it needs to be a question that everybody in the room, whatever their position in the organisation, whatever their background and culture, can answer and feel equal. One other questions that I might ask, if people don't see each other too often or are new to each other, I might say, what's your name, and a small fact to do with any part of your name or any nickname you've ever had that you're happy to share. And that's a fantastic one for me, because I'll just say at this stage, the way that I do that is to work with rounds. Now, you might have done rounds at Brownies, you might have done rounds in a meeting. They are a fundamental part of a thinking environment approach, but of course, they happen all over the place. The thing that is different about having a round to create a thinking environment is that you've got a question, and I'll talk about the types of questions a bit more. You've got a question, you set a direction. If you're online, you put a list of people into the chat box so people can see who's before them and who's after them. You ask for a volunteer, because it's good that you're setting the example with everything that you do, that this is an equal space. So you do not want the most powerful person or the leader in the room to volunteer to start. So you ask for a volunteer, and then the round goes through the list until everybody's spoken. And then the most important thing with this type of a round is that nobody speaks twice until everybody has spoken once. So even if you find out that somebody there was actually related to your grandfather, you don't say anything about it. You don't comment on it. You wait until you go round. And as the host of that room or the senior leader, you certainly don't comment on, give a value judgment on, or make a little bantery joke about what's just been said. Literally, nobody speaks twice until everybody's spoken once. And the other thing I love to do, particularly online, is I'll get people to say something like, when they've finished, I'm done, and pass on personally to the next person. So at this stage, I will be saying, I'm done. Over to you, Jackie. What do you think?
Love it. And I remember you using the question with our names when we had the CPD session where I met you. And I know sometimes people will flinch at the idea of, oh, tell us a fact about yourself. But by making it specific about our names, I can still remember the conversation and those people that I met that evening, and some of the stories about why people were given the names they were given, or about their middle name. Some people talked about their surname, their first name. So there was so much. And it was such a simple way for people who didn't already know each other to start to feel some connection with other people in that room. So I think, having experienced it, I would really echo the value that such a simple question can bring. And I would imagine, I'm just thinking about if people are listening to this and thinking, okay, but that might sound a bit weird if I've never done that before in a meeting, and then suddenly I go in and start positioning it this way. So if people are wanting to introduce this for the first time and they've not had this idea beforehand of doing a round and having everybody speak once before anybody speaks twice, how can they position that in their online meeting so that people understand what they're doing and why they're doing it?
So how do you introduce this? If you've not used a round before, how do you introduce it? It's really important to tell people what you're doing and to ask their permission. What I might say is, we've got this purpose today. It's incredibly important. You've all got a unique contribution to make, and I really want to hear from everybody today and make sure that we share time and space equally, because that is the best way, not only to respect one another, but to get the best performance we possibly can. So something I've come across that works really well is that if we kick off the day, and also that we kick off each agenda item with using questions to focus our conversation and discussion, but that we do a quick round so that we hear from everybody before we start, so that we don't immediately into a discussion that maybe one or two might know more about and might dominate. With your permission, we're going to use rounds today. I'd like to practice that and get used to it with just some simple questions to allow us to get to know each other a little bit better. So let's just practice around, and then I'm going to check in with you and find out what it was like for you, how you felt about it, and then you can move on from there.
Yeah, I think that kind of anxiety sometimes stops people trying new things like that. And yet what strikes me is the question that you suggested about what's going well. That's something that people could ask in every single team meeting as an opener, to encourage people to share genuinely what is going well, and for people to feel that they're able to tell others. So for me, it's that thing of, sometimes I think people might be nervous listening to this, that it's going to seem weird if they start doing it. But actually, once you've got over that initial discomfort, and you can tell people, I've been listening to this podcast, this is an idea.
Absolutely.
I want to try it.
Absolutely. And there are so many good reasons. I do use that question at every meeting that I run, Jackie, and I feel like I should apologise for it. But actually, no, because the beauty of that question is that there are very good business reasons for using it. It is an equalising question. Everybody can answer it, so everybody is engaged with it. But it's also, we're so focused on solving problems that we forget the strengths and gifts around us. So it may be that we don't know what our colleague is good at, and we don't know the good stuff that is happening. Now, that is going to raise our energy and our enthusiasm, hearing about those good things. So yes, that's a question that I use at every single meeting that I run, and I use it in meetings with my really close colleagues. But I worked with a client, I actually met them when I was facilitating a board meeting for a board they sat on. They worked for a very large FTSE 100 company. But they came from a working class Asian background. They said to me, Steph, using rounds and the whole thinking environment approach, this is diversity, equity, inclusion for people who don't get it. If they use this tool and they use it in the way that you said, it is going to bring some of that equality into the room. And the last thing I'll say on this, there are questions that I avoid asking. I remember somebody suggesting a round on what was the best thing you did this weekend, and that's intrusive. That's coming into your family and home life. So that question for me is, what's currently going well in your work and or life, so that people can choose how safe they feel.
That's fab. And I think that is a really good point, because I suppose thinking about the questions that you can ask and the questions that are going to help people feel included, but also thinking about those questions that will exclude people, that might just be part of normal conversation, but you don't actually think about the consequences of asking those. So I think that's a good point to make as well. If you're asking the questions, what is the impact? How will people feel answering those questions?
Yeah, and also, Pamela, I think, how does it relate to what we're doing? What's currently going well? We can see how that connects, knowing that good work projects are going on and so forth.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I think it's probably a good time to ask you now about just creating some sensible ground rules at the start of every meeting, or planning it in advance of those meetings. So in terms of putting those ground rules in place, like what would you say and how would you go about doing that?
That's a really interesting one, because I tend to work with coming in and setting some ground rules. I'll often be talking to people about paying attention to one another, listening without interruption, always, never interrupting each other, listening with interest in where that people will go with their thinking, and knowing that also we're there to ignite other people's thinking with our listening, rather than just listening to reply, or even worse, just waiting to reply. I'll be talking about equality, creating equality by sharing time and space equally, and understanding that we're all equal as thinkers, so we don't need to fix, advise, or think for people. And then I'd talk about being at ease, that we're free from rush and urgency, which would give me a lovely opportunity to say, can you put a number of fingers up on the screen for how many screens you've got open, or how many devices you can see? Can I cordially invite you to close those down? So that's what I do to set them. But if you want to work together, say for instance, as a team, you want to readdress, we're doing our online meetings, and you know what, it's not going that well for us, or we want to refresh. A technique that I've often used is to either do some work in breakout rooms or work in the rounds, just saying, I might kick off by asking people to share an experience of what are the best online meetings you've been on. I like to go from a place of strength. Let's all say, what do we already know about what's good? So what are the best online meetings you've been in, and what's made the difference? So you're already collecting from those people in that room working in your sector, what does good look like? And then I might be saying, what are your hopes and fears for having meetings together? We hope that we'll all turn up on time. We hope that we can see each other. And then I'd say, okay, so what agreements can we make to make sure that the hopes happen and the fears don't? So you could make those ground rules from the beginning. One particular bugbear that I will mention in terms of just setting a ground rule is that I will send out an invite for a meeting, and in that invite I will have the purpose of the meeting, I'll have the contribution I'm looking for from the people there, and I'll have the questions that we're going to use as discussion prompts. But I would also say, this is going to be an interactive online meeting. Please, can you make sure that you are somewhere where you can be undisturbed and you can focus and you can have your mic on, and you will be preferably well lit, and you can have your camera on as well. And I think it's one of my jobs is to discuss how we behave together. Nobody talks about how they behave in meetings on the whole, and that's my job, and it makes a real difference. And one of the things that is a particular bugbear for me is people going, I don't want to have my camera on. Before COVID, if you had said, we've got a meeting in room 6, I'm not feeling very comfortable today, so I'm going to come in with my cardigan over my head for the whole of the meeting, how would have that flown, please? So for me, that's an absolute basic ground rule. Maybe there are some issues around accessibility, but I think in that case, you've got to be talking about them and saying to people what makes me comfortable or uncomfortable online, and you've got to bottom that out. But essentially, I think that if you want people to be fully present, to feel safe with each other, then that goes out in the meeting invitation. This is a camera on meeting.
I think that's really interesting to hear you say that, because that has come up time and time again for my clients, is that culture of what's happening, where are people, are they on camera or are they not? And I think there can be an apprehension of asking people to be on camera, because it's almost like I feel uncomfortable asking people to put their camera on, because either maybe it's not the norm. More senior people sometimes are in meetings and don't have their camera on. There can be issues around neurodivergence, all sorts of bits and pieces that kind of come into play. And I think it's really helpful for people to hear someone who is an expert in better meetings to really reinforce what I think a lot of people instinctively know. And I think often there's that sense of, I instinctively know that should be the way that meetings are run, but actually I maybe don't feel able to ask that of people. And yet so often when you approach it the way that you've described, of having some of those ground rules that are co-created, of setting the expectation in advance, you make it far more possible, far more likely that those things are not an issue. And like you say, if there's accessibility issues, you can have those conversations individually with people, separately from within the meeting itself, can't you?
Absolutely. And things are complex, and I would not want to diss somebody who has genuine accessibility reasons for not wanting their camera on. But I think that is then at which point we say, what is uncomfortable about this? What would make you comfortable? What are the issues here? There is another thing that I do think we need to be a bit more sensitive and think about. I think a huge amount of inequality at work is down to class background. I do think there's some stuff to be aware of. We're on video today, and you can see that I've got a blank background behind me. Now, that's partly because I'm not very good at interior decoration, but it's also that I don't want stuff behind me that is flagging up my socioeconomic status. So I'm quite careful about that. And I think also there's something to be said about modeling that as a leader. So maybe it's about actually discussing that and thinking about having a blurred background and why we've got blurred backgrounds, or having something behind you so that you don't have to do that.
It is a great point with what is in the background, because you do find yourself as well, like when you're on online meetings, kind of looking at what is in the background, or like what are people interested in, or what are their interior design skills like, and all of that kind of stuff. Like you do, and it almost takes you away from what you're there for, doesn't it? So that plain background and being really aware of that, and also helping people to feel comfortable that a plain background's fine. You don't need anything fancy in the background. We just want to see your face because we want your contribution. And it is easier when you run online meetings, when you can see people's faces. It's so difficult. I find it so difficult when people switch the cameras off, because you can't see their expressions, and it's harder to keep the session flowing, isn't it, when you can't see people's faces and their reactions. So I love that. We've covered so much today, and I feel like there's so much more that we could cover. But I think to finish us off, what is the best way to close a meeting? Because you've talked about all of the great stuff we can do to make sure that they run well and that we get the most out of them, and all of the great contributions from the people that attend those meetings. But what's the best way to close it?
There's a couple of things to do before closing, which I'll mention, and then the closing itself. It's horrible coming out of a meeting and not knowing what everybody's going to do. So I might say, what have we agreed? What have we decided? What are our next steps? And get that out of the way and documented, either in the chat box, or if I'm in person on a flip chart, or on a shared Google Doc, whatever works for you. So that's my first round. What have we agreed and decided? My second round is, are there any burning issues that need to be noted before we leave the room today? And that's to cut out what used to happen, not anymore, the water cooler conversations where somebody says, oh, they never mentioned such and such, that's awful, I'm not going to do anything about that because that's rubbish. Is there a burning issue? And again, this is around nobody speaks twice until everybody's spoken once. And as the host, you just type up anything that needs to be noted into the chat box to be dealt with after the meeting. So there's no discussion on that, and you don't get sidelined and taken off track. And then the third thing is to just finish the meeting in the way that I always finish a meeting, which is to say to people, what's made today's meeting time well spent? And that can feel really scary if you're new to being a senior leader and running a high-powered meeting with maybe people senior to you. You're saying to them, why was this good today? But it's a brilliant thing to do. You will find out unexpected stuff about why that meeting was time well spent. To hear people say, I really got to know X today, or to hear people say, my thinking was really challenged today, that makes all the discipline and the preparation you put into hosting worthwhile. And also, as a host, you will find out what's working. And believe me, they'll tell you if it's not working. But if you focus on the good, that really helps you to continue with it. And it also sends people out of the meeting energized. And it also sends people out of the meeting having probably been complimented by their colleagues as well. Because when people say what was good was hearing so-and-so's brilliant thoughts on whatever it was, or just that they've all enjoyed being together, That's a really important thing. That's what I'd always do.
Love that. And I think the one that really strikes home for me is asking people, what have we agreed or decided? Because from experience, I would say it's so often that there is an assumption about what's been agreed or decided. And then either there's no notes or minutes, and the next meeting comes and there's disagreement, and you realise that there was an assumption that there were agreements, but in fact, there might not have been. Or you can have the situation where you then get the minutes and you go, oh, hang on, what? Was that what we agreed? So yeah, I think that one for me feels a powerful way to conclude. Again, really simple, really straightforward. And again, actually also really valuable in-person meetings, not just for online, but I think particularly in that online forum where it's so easy for everybody just to be dropping off the call, to have that before you get to that final conclusion is really powerful. So Steph, thank you so much for joining us and for all that you've shared today. I think we've covered so much ground, from the preparation, from how to make sure people feel included, from the ground rules and that ever-present conversation about whether or not to have cameras on. And I think I just really love those points that you've made as well about closing the meeting. So if people have recognised that there's some great stuff that they're hearing from you, how can they connect and learn more from you?
Oh, lovely. They can have a look at my website, which is called Making Meetings Matter. I've got a very distinctive surname, so if you pump my whole name into any search engine, you will come straight through to my website. I'm very happy to put a little sheet together on today's top tips, Jackie. What I'd like to do is a quick description of rounds, and then I'm just going to put my favourite questions on there for the beginning and end of meetings.
Perfect. And we'll share your website and your LinkedIn profile in the show notes so people can connect easily with you there. And we can also host that top tips document as well, so people will be able to download that from clicking the link in the show notes. So as ever, thank you so much for joining us and listening. Please do share this with anyone that you know is finding it a challenge, maybe making their online meetings work well for them. And we will be back again next week with another episode. Exciting news from us. If you're an ambitious leader or manager earning 50k or more and you're ready to take your career to the next level, we have an opportunity for you. Introducing Catalyst Career Club, your secret weapon for unlocking career success. As a member, you'll get access to monthly live training sessions, exclusive job opportunities, and the ability to get personalised advice from us on your toughest career challenges.
We've helped thousands of driven leaders like you secure significant pay rises, land dream roles, and thrive in their careers. And now we want to support you in achieving your most ambitious career goals too. Membership is just $6.99 per month with no contract or tie-in. And as a special bonus for being our podcast listeners, you can use the code podcast at checkout to get your first month for just £1. Head over to pamelalangan.com/Catalyst Career Club to sign up now, and we'll see you inside.